Where are you? Where are you? At the wind?
And he tapped her! He tapped her!
Where at the wind?
Please help me! No! 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 No!
Where are the people that stabbed her?
No! Help! Help! Help, guys! Help!
Welcome to 911 Cases. True calls, real horror. Perfect for a rainy night. These aren't just stories. They're the most chilling emergency calls ever recorded. Each one is designed to educate, shock, and stay with you long after the sirens fade. The 911 operator's name was Sarah Martinez, and she'd been taking emergency calls for 6 years. She thought she'd heard everything: domestic disputes, heart attacks, car crashes, drug overdoses. The usual symphony of human suffering that played out in a city built on vice and dreams. But nothing had prepared her for the call that came in at 11:43 a.m. on October 6th, 2022. 911, what's your emergency? The voice that answered was barely human, a woman gasping, hyperventilating, terror making her words almost incomprehensible. There's a man. He has a knife. Oh God, he just stabbed her. She's bleeding everywhere. He's stabbing everyone. Please, you have to hurry. Sarah's training kicked in. Stay calm. Get details. Dispatch help. Ma'am, I need you to tell me where you are. The Strip. We're on the Strip, near the showgirls. There's blood everywhere. He's still here. He's still stabbing people. In the background, Sarah could hear what sounded like the end of the world. Screaming, shouting, the sound of hundreds of people in absolute panic, car horns blaring, sirens already beginning to wail in the distance. Ma'am, are you safe? Can you see the suspect? He's running. He's running down the street with the knife. Oh my God, he just got someone else. Someone stop him. Sarah was already dispatching units, her fingers flying over the keyboard, but she kept the caller on the line. In 6 years of taking 911 calls, she'd never heard terror like this. Ma'am, what's your name? Jessica Chen. We were just taking pictures with the showgirls, and then he just... The line went quiet, except for sobbing. Jessica, I need you to stay with me. Help is coming. Can you tell me what the suspect looks like? Hispanic, maybe 35. He's wearing a grey shirt. He has a big knife, like a kitchen knife. There's so much blood on it. Sarah would later tell investigators that she'd never forget the sound of that call. The way Jessica's voice cracked when she said so much blood. The way you could hear the exact moment someone's worldview shattered. But Jessica Chen wasn't the only one calling. The 911 center was lighting up like a Christmas tree. Call after call, each one painting a picture of something that shouldn't happen in America, something that shouldn't happen anywhere. 911, what's your emergency? There's a man stabbing people on the Strip. I think he killed someone. 911, what's your emergency? My girlfriend. She's been stabbed. Please send an ambulance. 911, what's your emergency? I'm hiding in a casino. There's a man with a knife outside. Each call was a piece of a puzzle that, when assembled, would reveal one of the most shocking random attacks in Las Vegas history. But to understand how we got to that moment, how a city built on dreams became the stage for a nightmare, we need to go back to the beginning of that day. We need to meet the man who turned paradise into hell. At 6:47 a.m. on October 6th, 2022, while most of Las Vegas was still sleeping off the previous night's excesses, Yoni Barrios was already awake. Not because he wanted to be, but because the concrete bench where he'd spent the night wasn't exactly built for comfort. He was 35 years old, but looked older. Life on the streets has a way of aging you in dog years. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, his eyes carrying the particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from being tired, but from being tired of everything. Barrios had been homeless for months. Not the kind of homeless you see in movies, the wise-cracking vagrant with a heart of gold who teaches the wealthy protagonist about what really matters in life. This was the real kind of homeless, the invisible kind, the kind where you become a ghost haunting your own life. He gathered his possessions, everything he owned fit in a single duffel bag, and began walking. Where was he going? It didn't matter. When you have nowhere to go, every direction is the same. Las Vegas in the early morning is a different city than Las Vegas at night. The neon lights that seem magical in the darkness look cheap and desperate in the daylight. The streets that pulse with energy after dark are littered with the detritus of dreams. Empty bottles, cigarette butts, the occasional lost shoe. It's like seeing a beautiful woman without makeup for the first time. The illusion is broken. Barrios walked past the casinos where he'd once worked as a dishwasher, past the restaurants where he'd been turned away when he asked for work, past the homeless shelters that were already full. He was a ghost in the machine of a city that only cared about you if you had money to lose. But today was different. Today, Barrios was carrying something that made him feel less invisible. Wrapped carefully in a towel inside his duffel bag was a foot-long kitchen knife. Not just any knife. This was a professional chef's knife, the kind that costs more than most people spend on groceries in a month. The blade was perfect, unmarked, sharp enough to slice through bone. Where had he gotten it? The police would later investigate this question extensively. Had he stolen it? Bought it? Found it? The answer would remain a mystery, but what mattered wasn't where it came from. What mattered was what it represented. For the first time in months, Yoni Barrios felt powerful. He'd been telling people he was a chef. It wasn't technically a lie. He had worked in kitchens, had washed dishes, had prepared food. But he'd never been a chef in the way that mattered. He'd never been respected, never been listened to, never been seen as anything more than another pair of hands. But with the knife, he could pretend. He could tell people he was a chef, and the blade was proof. He could ask to take pictures with it, and suddenly, he wasn't just another homeless man. He was interesting. He was worth talking to. At least, that's what he told himself. The truth was darker. The knife wasn't just a prop for his delusions of grandeur. It was a security blanket for his rage. Because underneath the exhaustion and the homelessness and the desperation, Yoni Barrios was angry. Angry at the world that had forgotten him. Angry at the system that had failed him. Angry at the people who looked through him like he didn't exist. And today, that anger was about to find a target. The Wynn Las Vegas is the kind of place that makes you feel poor just by walking through the doors. Everything is crystal and marble and gold, designed to make you believe that if you just had enough money, you could live like this forever. The air itself seems expensive, filtered and perfumed and cooled to the perfect temperature. At 9:15 a.m., Yoni Barrios walked through those doors, carrying his duffel bag and his knife and his rage. He wasn't there to gamble. He couldn't afford to gamble. He was there for something else entirely. The casino floor was nearly empty, too early for the serious gamblers, too late for the all-night degenerates. A few elderly tourists fed quarters into slot machines, their movements mechanical and hopeless. Cocktail waitresses moved between tables with practiced smiles, their trays empty of everything but optimism. Barrios found who he was looking for near the back of the casino, a janitor named Miguel Hernandez, mopping the floors with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing the same job for 15 years. Miguel was one of the invisible people, like Barrios himself, someone who kept the fantasy running but was never part of it. "Excuse me," Barrios said, approaching Miguel with the careful politeness of someone who knew what it was like to be ignored. Miguel looked up, probably surprised to be addressed directly. In his experience, the kind of people who frequented the Wynn didn't typically acknowledge the help. "Yes," Miguel said in accented English. "I need help," Barrios said. "I want ICE to come get me. I want to be deported." Miguel blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. "What?" "Immigration. I want them to send me back to Guatemala. I don't want to be here anymore. Think about that for a moment. Barrios was so desperate to escape his life that he wanted to be forcibly removed from the country. He'd rather be deported than continue living on the streets of Las Vegas. Miguel, who had his own complicated relationship with immigration, didn't know what to say. I can't help you with that, man. You need to call them yourself. How do I call them? I don't know. Google it. Barrios didn't have a phone, didn't have internet access, didn't have any of the tools that most people take for granted. He was asking for help from the only person who might understand what it was like to be invisible. Please, Barrios said, I just want to go home. Miguel looked at this man, really looked at him, and saw something that made him uncomfortable. Not just desperation, but something else, something darker. I'm sorry, Miguel said. I really can't help you. Barrios nodded, but something in his expression changed. The politeness evaporated, replaced by something cold and bitter. Nobody can help me, Barrios said quietly. Nobody ever helps me. He walked away, leaving Miguel with a feeling he couldn't quite name. Later, after everything happened, Miguel would remember this conversation. He would wonder if there was something he could have done differently, some way he could have prevented what came next. But that's the thing about hindsight. It's always perfect, and it's always too late. After leaving the Wynn, Barrios spent the next 2 hours walking the Strip. Not aimlessly, there was a purpose to his movement, though he might not have been able to articulate what it was. He was looking for something, or someone. The Strip was coming alive around him. Tour buses disgorged their cargo of tourists eager to experience the Vegas they'd seen in movies. Street performers set up their acts, hoping to catch the early spending crowd. The showgirls were arriving for their shifts, transforming from ordinary women into living fantasies with the application of makeup and feathers and sequins. Barrios watched it all with the detached interest of someone who was no longer part of the human race. These people lived in a world where problems could be solved with money, where happiness was just a jackpot away, where hope was always just around the corner. He lived in a different world, a world where hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. But he had the knife. At 11:20 a.m., he found a quiet spot behind a dumpster and unwrapped the blade. In the harsh Nevada sunlight, it gleamed like a mirror. He held it up, studying his reflection in the steel. The man looking back at him was someone he barely recognized. I'm a chef, he said to his reflection. I'm a professional chef. The lie had become so much a part of him that it almost felt true. He'd told it so many times that the words came automatically. But today, for the first time, he was going to make the lie real. He was going to use the knife for what it was made for, not for cooking, for cutting. Barrios rewrapped the blade and put it back in his bag. Then he walked back onto the Strip, into the crowd of tourists and dreamers and believers. But he was no longer invisible. He was carrying something that made him dangerous. And dangerous people get noticed. At 11:35 a.m., near the corner of Las Vegas Boulevard and Flamingo Road, a group of showgirls was setting up for their day shift. These weren't the showgirls of old Vegas, the ones who performed in elaborate casino revues and dated mobsters. These were working women trying to make a living in a city that had moved on from their particular brand of entertainment. Their names were Anna Westby, Maris DiGiovanni, and Samantha Torres. They were friends, co-workers, and survivors in a business that chewed up and spit out beautiful women on a daily basis. Anna was 28, a former dancer who'd come to Vegas with dreams of making it big in the entertainment industry. Like most people who come to Vegas with dreams, she'd discovered that the city was better at crushing dreams than fulfilling them. But she'd adapted. She'd learned to make money posing for pictures with tourists, turning her beauty into a commodity that could pay the rent. Maris was 30, a single mother who'd moved to Vegas from California when her relationship fell apart. She needed work that paid cash, work that didn't require background checks or references or explanations about the gap in her employment history. Being a showgirl wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it paid the bills. Samantha was the veteran of the group at 32. She'd been working the strip for 5 years, long enough to know which tourists were worth talking to and which ones were trouble. She'd developed a sixth sense about dangerous men, a skill that had kept her safe in a business where safety was never guaranteed. They were setting up their spot, a stretch of sidewalk that got good foot traffic but wasn't claimed by any other performers, when they noticed him. "Check out this guy," Samantha said quietly, nodding toward Barrios. He was standing about 20 feet away, watching them with an intensity that made all 3 women uncomfortable. He wasn't looking at them the way most men looked at them, with desire or appreciation, or even crude objectification. He was looking at them like he was studying them, like he was planning something. "He's been staring at us for like 10 minutes, Anna said. "Should we move?" "Let's give it a few more minutes," Maris said. "If he doesn't approach or leave, we'll find another spot." But Barrios had made his decision. He was approaching. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I have a proposition for you." The 3 women exchanged glances. Propositions from strange men were part of the job, but they were usually sexual in nature. This felt different. "What kind of proposition?" Samantha asked. She was the designated spokesperson for the group, the one who handled the negotiations and the difficult customers. "I'm a chef," Barrios said, reaching into his duffel bag. "I want to take some pictures with my knife, professional photos. I can pay you." He pulled out the blade, and all 3 women took an involuntary step back. It was huge, longer than a ruler, gleaming in the sunlight, obviously sharp enough to cut through anything. That's a really big knife," Anna said. "Professional grade," Barrios said proudly. "I'm a chef. This is my knife." Now, you have to understand something about these women. They dealt with weird requests all day long. Tourists who wanted to pose in inappropriate ways. Drunk men who made inappropriate comments. Bachelor parties who thought they were entitled to more than just photos. But this was different. This was a man with a weapon asking them to pose with him. Every instinct they had was screaming at them to run. But they were also professionals. They needed the money, and he was offering to pay them. "How much?" Samantha asked. $50 each, Barrios said. "Just a few photos." $50 each was good money, better than they'd make in an hour of regular tourist photos, and he seemed harmless enough. Sad, maybe, desperate, but not dangerous. "Okay," Samantha said, "but we keep this quick, and you put the knife away as soon as we're done." "Of course," Barrios said. "I'm a professional." They arranged themselves for the photos. Barrios held the knife up, trying to look like a chef, showing off his tools. The women smiled their professional smiles, the ones they'd perfected through thousands of interactions with tourists. And then Anna giggled. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It wasn't meant to be mocking. It was just a nervous reaction to the absurdity of the situation. 3 showgirls posing with a homeless man and his giant knife on the Las Vegas Strip. But Yoni Barrios didn't hear nervous laughter. He heard mockery. He heard the sound of people who thought he was a joke, a loser, a failure. He heard the sound of everyone who had ever dismissed him, ignored him, or treated him like he didn't matter. "They were laughing at me," he would later tell police. And in that moment, 35 years of pain and rage and humiliation reached a breaking point. The human brain is capable of processing information at incredible speeds. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, it can recognize danger, calculate responses, and make decisions that mean the difference between life and death. But sometimes, the brain simply can't process what it's seeing. Sometimes reality becomes so far removed from normal experience that the mind just stops. That's what happened to Anna Westby, Maris Di Giovanni, and Samantha Torres when Yoni Barrios lunged forward with the knife. For a split second, none of them moved. Their brains were trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what should have been happening. This was supposed to be a photo shoot. This was supposed to be easy money. This was supposed to be just another day on the strip. But Barrios had driven the foot-long blade directly into Anna's chest, just below her left breast, and suddenly the world exploded into chaos. Anna's scream wasn't like anything you hear in movies. It was primal, raw, the sound of someone who had just discovered that they were going to die. It was the sound of innocence being murdered. Blood erupted from the wound, soaking through her costume and pooling on the sidewalk. The bright red looked almost artificial against the colourful feathers and sequins, like special effects from a movie that had gone horribly wrong. Maris tried to run, but Barrios was faster. The knife came down again, this time catching her in the shoulder blade. She stumbled, fell, tried to crawl away, but Barrios was already moving to his next target. Samantha had always prided herself on her ability to read dangerous men, but she'd never encountered anything like this. She froze, her brain unable to process the transformation of a sad, homeless man into a killing machine. The knife found her too. All of this happened in less than 10 seconds. 10 seconds for 3 lives to be forever changed, 10 seconds for the Las Vegas Strip to transform from a place of dreams into a place of nightmares. But the nightmare was just beginning. If you've ever been to the Las Vegas Strip during the day, you know how crowded it can be. Thousands of people packed onto sidewalks, moving in rivers of humanity between the casinos and hotels and attractions. It's claustrophobic under the best of circumstances. Now imagine that crowd suddenly realizing that someone is stabbing people with a knife. The panic didn't spread gradually. It exploded outward from the point of attack like a bomb going off. One moment, people were taking selfies and admiring street performers. The next, they were running for their lives. But here's the thing about crowds in panic. They don't move efficiently. They don't organize themselves or help each other. They become a living organism driven by nothing but terror, and that organism is often more dangerous than whatever caused the panic in the first place. People fell. People got trampled. People got separated from their families and friends. Children got lost in the chaos, their screams adding to the cacophony of terror. And through it all, Yoni Barrios kept moving, kept stabbing, kept destroying lives. He wasn't running randomly. There was a pattern to his movement, a terrible logic to his violence. He was moving down the strip, staying close to the crowd, targeting anyone who got too close. Marcus Williams, a tourist from Ohio, was stabbed in the back while trying to help a fallen woman. He would survive, but he'd never forget the feeling of the blade sliding between his ribs. Patricia Gonzalez, a local woman who worked at one of the casinos, was slashed across the arm when she tried to use her phone to call for help. The knife cut through her jacket, her shirt, and her skin, leaving a wound that would require 30 stitches. David Chen, no relation to Jessica Chen, the woman who made the first 911 call, was stabbed in the leg while trying to shield his girlfriend from the chaos. He would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. Each attack lasted only seconds, but each one left a permanent mark on someone's life. Barrios wasn't trying to kill everyone. He was trying to hurt everyone, to make them feel the pain he'd been carrying for so long, and he was succeeding. The sounds of the strip that day were unlike anything anyone had ever heard. The usual background noise of slot machines and traffic and conversation was replaced by screaming, crying, and the wail of sirens. Lots of sirens. But the most chilling sound was one that most people didn't notice in the chaos, the sound of Barrios himself. He wasn't screaming or shouting or making any noise at all. He was silent, focused, methodical in his violence. He was a ghost who had finally found a way to make himself visible. In moments of crisis, people reveal who they really are. Some rise to the occasion, becoming heroes they never knew they could be. Others collapse, paralyzed by fear or self-preservation. On the strip that day, there were both. Miguel Santos, a security guard at the Bellagio, heard the commotion and ran toward it instead of away from it. He was off-duty, out of uniform, just a guy trying to enjoy his day off. But when he saw what was happening, he didn't hesitate. He tackled a tourist who was filming the carnage instead of helping, screaming at him to call 911. He helped an elderly woman who had fallen in the chaos, half carrying her to safety. He tried to direct the crowd away from the danger, using his voice and his presence to create some semblance of order. But he couldn't stop Barrios. Nobody could. Linda Patterson, a nurse from Denver who was visiting with her husband, immediately began providing first aid to the wounded. She used her scarf as a tourniquet for David Chen's leg wound. She applied pressure to Patricia Gonzalez's arm. She talked to Anna Westby, who was somehow still conscious despite the knife wound in her chest, telling her to stay awake, to keep breathing, to hold on. "You're going to be okay," Linda kept saying, even though she wasn't sure it was true. "Help is coming. You're going to be okay." But for every hero, there were a dozen people who did nothing, who filmed the carnage with their phones, who ran away and left others behind, who cared more about their own safety than the lives of strangers. That's not a judgment. It's human nature. Most people aren't wired to run toward danger. Most people aren't equipped to handle extreme violence. Most people just want to survive. But survival isn't always about running away. Sometimes it's about running toward. Officer Sarah Martinez, not the 911 operator, but a different Sarah Martinez, was the first police officer to arrive on scene. She was a 5-year veteran of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and she'd seen her share of violence. But nothing like this. She arrived to find a scene that looked like a war zone. Blood on the sidewalk, people screaming and crying, wounded victims scattered across the strip, and somewhere in the chaos, a man with a knife who was still attacking people. Her training kicked in: secure the scene, provide aid to the wounded, locate and neutralize the threat. But the threat was moving. Barrios had already traveled several blocks down the strip, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. He was like a tornado, impossible to predict, impossible to stop, devastating everything in his path. Officer Martinez coordinated with the other responding units, setting up a perimeter and trying to track Barrios's movement. But the strip was chaos. Hundreds of people were running in every direction. Witnesses were giving conflicting descriptions of the suspect, and Barrios himself seemed to have disappeared into the crowd. For a few terrifying minutes, it seemed like he might escape, like he might vanish back into the invisible world of the homeless and the forgotten, free to strike again whenever the mood took him. But then someone spotted him. His name was James Rodriguez, and he was a maintenance worker at the Sands Casino. He was on his lunch break, eating a sandwich and watching the chaos unfold from what he thought was a safe distance, when he saw him. Barrios was moving toward the sands, the bloody knife still in his hand, his clothes soaked with the blood of his victims. He looked like something out of a horror movie, a human monster who had stepped out of the darkness and into the light. But James Rodriguez saw something else. He saw a man who was tired, a man who was slowing down, a man who might be stopped. James was a big guy, 6'3", 240 pounds, built like a linebacker. He'd played football in high school, had been pretty good at it too, but he'd never tackled anyone who was armed with a knife. He didn't think about it. If he'd thought about it, he probably wouldn't have done it. But sometimes, thinking is the enemy of action. He dropped his sandwich and ran. Barrios didn't see him coming. He was focused on the crowd ahead of him, looking for his next victim. He didn't notice the maintenance worker charging at him from behind until it was too late. James hit him like a freight train. The tackle was perfect, textbook form, driving through the target, wrapping up the arms to prevent the knife from being used. They went down hard on the concrete, James's weight driving the air from Barrios's lungs. The knife skittered across the sidewalk, finally coming to rest in a planter filled with desert plants. The blade was so soaked with blood that it looked like it had been dipped in red paint. Barrios struggled, but he was exhausted. The adrenaline that had fueled his rampage was fading, leaving him weak and disoriented. James held him down, pressing his face into the concrete, waiting for the police to arrive. "Stay down," James said. "Don't move. Don't even breathe hard. But Barrios wasn't fighting anymore. The rage that had driven him to attack 8 innocent people was gone, replaced by something else. Something that looked almost like relief. He was no longer invisible. He was no longer ignored. He had done something that would make people notice him, remember him, talk about him. He had finally mattered. Officer Martinez arrived moments later, her gun drawn, her heart pounding. She'd been prepared for a fight, but what she found was a broken man lying on the sidewalk, held down by a casino maintenance worker who had just become a hero. "Sir, I need you to step back," she told James. "We've got this." James released Barrios and stepped away, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He'd just tackled a man with a knife. He'd just ended a rampage that could have killed dozens of people. He'd just saved lives. Officer Martinez cuffed Barrios, reading him his rights in a voice that was steady despite the chaos around them. Barrios didn't resist. He didn't speak. He just lay there, staring at the sidewalk, as if he was trying to process what he'd done. The rampage was over, but the real story was just beginning. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, the Las Vegas Strip became a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off several blocks, turning the normally bustling tourist destination into something that looked like a battlefield. Ambulances lined the street, their red and blue lights painting the casino facades in colors that had nothing to do with entertainment. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize the wounded, knowing that every second could mean the difference between life and death. Anna Westby was the most critically injured. The knife had pierced her chest, missing her heart by inches, but puncturing her lung. She was conscious but struggling to breathe, her costume soaked with blood, her face pale from blood loss. "What's your name, honey?" asked the paramedic who was working on her. "Anna," she whispered. "Anna Westby." "Okay, Anna. I'm going to take good care of you. You're going to be fine." But privately, the paramedic wasn't sure. The wound was deep, the blood loss significant. Anna needed surgery, and she needed it fast. Maris Di Giovanni was in better shape physically, but she was in shock. The knife had caught her in the shoulder blade, a painful but not life-threatening injury. But psychologically, she was devastated. She kept asking about Anna, about the other victims, about whether everyone was okay. "I should have seen it coming," she kept saying. "I should have known he was dangerous." But how could she have known? How could anyone have predicted that a sad, homeless man would suddenly transform into a killing machine? Samantha Torres had been the least injured of the 3 showgirls, but she was perhaps the most traumatized. She'd always prided herself on her ability to read people, to spot dangerous men before they became dangerous. But she'd completely missed this one. "I'm supposed to be good at this," she told the paramedic who was treating her minor wounds. "I'm supposed to know when someone's dangerous." "Nobody could have predicted this," the paramedic said. "This isn't your fault." But trauma doesn't care about logic. Trauma doesn't care about fault or blame or responsibility. Trauma just exists, heavy and permanent, changing the way you see the world forever. The other victims were scattered across multiple hospitals. Some would recover fully. Others would carry the scars, both physical and psychological, for the rest of their lives. But 2 victims wouldn't be going to the hospital at all. Brent Hallett was 47 years old, a father of 2 from Phoenix, who was visiting Las Vegas for a bachelor party. He wasn't supposed to be on the Strip that morning. The bachelor party wasn't scheduled to start until the evening. But he'd arrived early, wanting to explore the city and maybe do a little gambling before his friends arrived. He was walking past the showgirls when Barrios began his attack. Instead of running like most people, Brent tried to help. He saw Anna Westby bleeding on the ground and rushed to her aid, not realizing that the attacker was still nearby. The knife caught him in the back, between his shoulder blades, severing his spinal cord and puncturing his heart. He died instantly, his body collapsing next to the woman he'd been trying to save. Brent's friends wouldn't learn what happened until they arrived at the airport that evening. They'd been planning to surprise him, to celebrate his upcoming wedding, to give him a weekend he'd never forget. They were right about that last part. His fiancée, Sarah, was at work in Phoenix when she got the call. She was a kindergarten teacher, helping 5-year-olds with their math homework, when her phone rang with news that would destroy her life. "There's been an accident," the voice said. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but Brent is dead." The math homework scattered to the floor. The children stared at their teacher, who had suddenly started crying for no reason they could understand. Sarah's world had ended, but theirs continued, oblivious to the tragedy that had just struck. Maris Di Giovanni died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. She'd been conscious when the paramedics arrived, asking about Anna, worried about her friend. But the knife had nicked an artery, and she was bleeding internally. "Tell my daughter I love her," she whispered to the paramedic as her blood pressure dropped. "Tell her mommy loves her." Her daughter Sophia was 7 years old. She was at school, learning about fractions and multiplication tables, when her world changed forever. She wouldn't learn about it until she got home, wouldn't understand what it meant until much later. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her mother is never coming home? How do you explain that sometimes bad things happen to good people for no reason at all? Maris's father, Robert Di Giovanni, was at work in California when he got the call. He was a contractor, building houses for other people's families, when he learned that his own family had been destroyed. He would later say that he aged 10 years in that phone call, that he felt something break inside him that would never heal. 2 lives ended, 2 families destroyed, all because a homeless man with a knife decided that his pain was more important than their lives. Detective Lisa Chen, the third Chen in our story, but not related to the others, was assigned to lead the investigation into what the media was already calling the strip stabbing. She was a 15-year veteran of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and she'd seen every kind of violence the city had to offer. But this case was different. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong, or a domestic dispute that had escalated. This was random violence, the kind that kept people awake at night wondering if they were safe anywhere. The first challenge was understanding the timeline. With hundreds of witnesses and dozens of cell phone videos, Detective Chen had to piece together exactly what had happened and when. The attack had lasted less than 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes had generated hours of footage and testimony. The second challenge was understanding the motive. Why had Yoni Barrios decided to attack complete strangers? What had driven him to such extreme violence? The answer, it turned out, was complicated. Barrios had a history of mental illness, but he'd never been violent before. He'd been diagnosed with depression and anxiety, but he'd never sought treatment. He'd been homeless for months, but he'd never been arrested for anything more serious than trespassing. He was, by all accounts, a ghost in the system, someone who had fallen through the cracks.